So, the first question we wanted to ask is just to get you to talk about your career path. And you graduated from Michigan State University and moved from there to the position you're in now. Can you tell us about how you got here?
Yeah. Well, I'm an immigrant. I was born in Greece and came to the U.S. At the age of 8.5, and I was always inspired from a very young age about philosophers and Aristotle's view on the world and being a global citizen and really taking on adventures and traveling and that kind of thing. So after I graduated from Michigan State, I worked in the Michigan Senate as a legislative assistant. Was the deputy director of the Reagan-Bush '84 campaign, which was a fascinating experience. And then moved to Washington and worked for the Secretary of Commerce and learned a lot about working with governors and state legislators and mayors. That was kind of my role, was in charge of intergovernmental affairs at a time when there was a lot of interaction with the states and localities. And really was a phenomenal experience to be able to travel at such a young age all over the country and stay in great hotels and eat fine food and meet all these amazing, smart people. I thought I died and gone to heaven. And then after that, I went to work for Arm & Hammer at Occidental Petroleum and got deep into legislative regulations and policies at the state level with environmentalists. There was a big environmental movement back at that time in the late 80s. And so that was a lot of exciting, a lot of action going on, and you had to work with a lot of veterans in the industry across oil companies and plastics companies and consumer goods companies and build coalitions on how to deal with very intrusive and draconian environmental policies. And then after that, I went to work with Bechtel as a VP overseas, based in London and Athens, running their marketing and communications, and had a chance to travel and see the world in places like India and Russia and the Middle East and so forth. And then I got recruited by FedEx, and I've been here 16 years, going on 60.
Two follow-up questions
Sure,
for you.
sure.
The first one is, can you talk a little bit about your political campaign experience and how that has informed or helped your work in the corporate sector?
Yeah. I think political experience is very profound and valuable in the corporate communications world, and here's why. First of all, you have an outcome that takes place. You have a defined time frame by which to operate. You have multiple stakeholders with issues and agendas at play. You have a competitor, and you have to apply a lot of research rigor to understand the makeup of the population you're dealing with, whether it be at a local level, a state level, or a national level. So it forces you to move quickly, to have a strategy, to have a very clear execution plan, to be able to manage multiple aspects of a campaign, like a project management program would, and to use analytics to target messages, target positioning statements, understand the use of polling and research, much like you would in business between two corporations, whether it's Pepsi, Coke, or FedEx, UPS. And also the importance, and perhaps this may be the most important, is the power of volunteers, of really collaborating and inspiring and leading volunteers, people who aren't getting paid, but they believe in the cause. And that's so important when you become a manager or an executive in the business world, because it trains you on how to really motivate people when they frankly don't even have to be there. So I think in short, that's why political experience is very important. And plus, by the way, I think every executive from CEO on down needs to understand how public policy and how legislation and how coalitions get developed, because every company is exposed to some regulatory or political issue, whether it be in the US or abroad. So if you understand politics at the grassroots level and how decisions get made and how coalitions develop, you can then understand how the elected official or appointed official is going to think through their position and then what's it going to take for you to connect with that person or persuade that person. So you have to find something politically palatable. So it's an art and a science.
Is there anything that doesn't transfer? You've made a very good case about a lot of things that do. Anything that you can think of that doesn't really transfer?
The one thing about politics that I have seen over the years that I don't believe translates well in the corporate world is this all or nothing mentality, what I would call the polarized political animal who lives or breathes by a certain point of view on either side of the spectrum, whether it's far to the right or far to the left, because you alienate people that way. And you can't succeed in a corporation if you're alienating people or if you're taking extreme positions. So I think the lesson learned is to try to find a middle ground in politics and in business so that you can survive, so that you can be a consensus builder, negotiate, bring disparate views towards a common goal. But if you're a hardliner on either side of the spectrum, I don't think that particularly bodes well in a corporate environment.
Okay. Another key part of your career development, obviously, is your international experience.
Yes.
From early on.
Yes.
And I guess I wanted to ask you to talk about that and how that's influenced your work in your present position.
Yeah. International experience, I think, is becoming very, very important now for corporate communications executives, and frankly, any executive, because everything is global and the internet has democratized decision making. But in my mind, the most important lesson of an international experience is that it teaches you how to adjust to change. And if you follow the axiom, success is how well one adjusts to change, and you can apply that in life to relationships, to economic cycles, to moving towns or cities or schools or jobs. Success in life is determined by how well one adjusts to change. So when you go from an American sort of dominated system to a UK or a China or a German culture, what works here and what brought you success here may or may not translate well there. And what I notice is some people, when they deal with a challenge or or adversity, and we all do, because there's always an element of surprise when you go into a foreign land. What they tend to do is they fall back on their comfort zone. They tend to double down on what they did here in the US, thinking that they would prevail or overcome that challenge. That doesn't work. And I saw that firsthand. Rather than thinking through the situation, stepping back and finding an end around or coming up with a creative way. So it forces you and compels you to adapt and change your thought process, your behavior, your judgment, your tactics, your approach, depending on what's appropriate in any particular culture. And if you can convey that in a very authentic way, people will work with you more so. I think you can be more effective that way. And certainly relationships in most of these countries are really the most critical aspect of business. And if you don't understand, let's say, the nuances of how those relationships works, or the etiquette or the norms or the mores, then you will fail. So in essence, in life, we always have to reinvent ourselves. We always have to learn something new. And when you're working internationally, you're doing that constantly, and it's exciting.
It does sound really exciting. Cultural gaps. You were just talking about those in many ways and how they do exist. And can you talk a little bit more about how you deal with the cultural gaps that you've come across?
Yeah. Well, at FedEx, we operate in 220 countries and territories, and we're part of the social fabric of these societies. And we have to deal with so many issues, regulatory issues, customs issues, consumer issues, security issues, tax issues. So we feel it's important to hire, indigenous executives, people from that country, to be the leaders, to be the ambassadors in the face of FedEx. Now, what we do is we translate and replicate our culture, our values, our quality principles, our service principles, the brand and identity standards. So we strive for consistency at the cultural level and how we function as a corporation as it relates to customers in the marketplace and governance issues and legal issues and regulatory compliance. But in terms of the executives who are running those businesses, we put in local folks. And that has been an incredibly successful formula. In fact, you might be surprised to know that of 300,000 total team members in our company worldwide, there's only about 120 expats that we have at FedEx. It's pretty phenomenal.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah.
Something else I want to ask you about, talking about your career development.
Yes.
Who has had the most significant influence on your career and why?
Yeah. Well, without question, the person who's had the most significant influence on my career is Fred Smith, the founder and current chairman and CEO of FedEx. First of all, Fred is just an unbelievable leader and cares so much about people and his family. And he has taught me to really be true to yourself, that you have to be at the core principled and understand what you're trying to achieve, how you deal with people, and to pay attention to other things in life than just money or title, your family, your friends, to have fun. He is a man of extraordinary intellectual capacity, and he believes in balance. And by that I mean a combination of being really good at strategic thinking, being great at organizational and executional capabilities, building a culture that has discretionary effort and strong values and teamwork and collaboration. And I think he got that from his military experience, where there was such a codependency for survival by people on the front lines. So Fred's view, I think, is to be a successful executive, you have to be as great as you can be in your particular subject. You need to use kaleidoscope thinking in solving problems and dealing with situations outside of your comfort zone, and that's how you innovate. You have to be honest with a lot of integrity. You have to be respectful to people and empower people. And then you also, I think, have to be, as I said earlier, true to yourself.
Can you clarify the term kaleidoscope thinking?
Kaleidoscope thinking is, from what I understand, an idea that was born through a Harvard professor years ago. And the idea is that when you face a problem and you hit a wall on something, most people tend to kind of go back to their repository of knowledge and try to find a way through that wall. It could be a process issue or what have you. And what it means, what it says is, if you change the kaleidoscope, as you'll note, the colors and the light will vary depending on how you change the lens. So it's important to try to draw upon maybe a lesson learned in a whole different industry. In our case, it could be maybe something in the biotech world happened or in the software world happened that we can apply to a problem or a challenge that we're facing here. And it may be kind of related to what Stephen Covey says, is step back and sharpen the saw as well, and take a clean, fresh sheet approach to a problem or an opportunity.
Okay. What's been the biggest challenge you've faced in your career?
I think the biggest challenge is maintaining a healthy balance between your work, your health, and your family. And I know that might sound a little corny, because I probably could come up with endless crises or challenges in the workplace, but that's not really the way I think about challenge. I think in life, we as adults and executives have to be very mindful of our responsibilities and obligations we have, and mine are at work, they're at home, and they're within my soul and spirit and my value system. So sometimes we get a little out of whack, we overdo this and it's just, I always find that it's a work in progress constantly to be mindful of this perpetual challenge of being balanced and taking care of your body and health, paying attention to your loved ones and friends and making sure that you're being as great a leader with your people as you possibly could.
The balance makes you better as a leader, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think there's some of that in being true to yourself, as I mentioned earlier about Fred Smith, and he clearly is a living example of someone who leads a balanced life, you know, and never takes time or never ceases to take an opportunity to call one of his kids, or even if he's in the middle of a very important meeting.
You've talked about corporate culture.
Yes.
You mentioned that, and I wanted to find out from you, what is your role in shaping and reinforcing the corporate culture at FedEx?
I think corporate culture is arguably the most important asset that a company has, and it is the connective tissue to reputation and brand. And if you have a strong culture, you will invariably have a strong reputation. The two are complementary and intertwined. And our philosophy is you start inside before you can win outside. And particularly today, culture is so important because as businesses become more and more commoditized, and there is a race for intellectual capital, particularly because we're dealing in free agent societies. People and workers are so mobile now, they're not as loyal as they used to be. And certainly knowing that employees can be either your best ally or advocate or your worst enemy. All of these reasons, recruiting, retention, discretionary effort, the ability to engage people and empower them to be your advocates over the internet, to me, demonstrate the fact that culture now is more important than it's ever been. And if you can keep that front and center as an executive, and we're fortunate enough to do that here, so it's a real pleasure to work in a company that really shares this philosophy. Corporate communications people can find immense opportunities to add value.
You mentioned the idea of corporate culture and reputation being linked. I guess I wanted to talk to you, follow up on that by asking you to talk a little bit about what are the ethical considerations that you keep in mind when you're thinking about communicating to the folks inside and to the external stakeholders?
Communicating inside and outside, I think you have to use the same principles and guidelines because the line of demarcation between a workplace and a marketplace is now blurred because largely of the internet. So what we send internally and how we communicate internally and how we inspire our folks internally has to meet a litmus test of someone on the outside seeing that and making a judgment call on that.
Is that a change? I wanted to ask you to talk about the changes you've observed in the public relations practice over the decades. Is that one of them?
Well, the most profound change, I think, in the world of communications is that the old model of command and control has been turned upside down. I mean, the pyramid has been inverted. The power curve now is with people, consumers, your employees. And certainly when you factor in the historic levels of distrust that people have now in corporations, which is unfortunate, I think, because it's only been the bad actions of a few that have kind of colored a lot of really good companies. You have to really change the way you think through your language, your actions, how transparent and candid and authentic you are. And really try to find a way to engender loyalty and pride among your people. Because if the world knows that you're treating people with respect and you're treating them fairly and you have a strong culture or ethos, they will give you the benefit of the doubt in a crisis, and every company faces them. They will also be more likely to purchase your product. They will also be more likely to trust you, to invest in you, to want to work there and buy your product or service. So to me, culture has both tangible and intangible benefits. The tangible benefits are that you're able to incent people to do the absolute best they can do in whatever job they have, whether it's a customer service agent, a pilot, or a courier in our case. So you're trying to get optimal performance because they believe in what you're doing, they are proud and loyal. And then the ultimate payoff, really, and this is, I think, the holy grail with respect to culture, is finding the sweet spot of discretionary effort. And that comes from the heart. That can't be legislated. And finding a way to get to people's hearts is a very interesting issue. And that's where people, things like reputation, the conduct of the executives, how you're treating people. When we have cases of couriers going into burning homes to rescue babies, all these heroic efforts, that's not something that's in their manager guide or in their job scope. It's because they want to live up to that ideal they have of what a FedEx person should do. And we have this interesting saying here. It's actually a rallying cry. It's called the Purple Promise. And everyone in the company, whether you're in Hong Kong or Boston or any operating environment, can recite to you the Purple Promise is that I will make every FedEx experience outstanding, whether I'm dealing with a peer-to-peer or with a customer. And that is the rallying cry. We try to really celebrate it, reward it, incent it. So when you come into this company and you're a new employee and you hear about these heroic stories, you hear about discretionary effort, you hear about the value system, you hear about the Purple Promise, you want to emulate that, because if you don't, then you're likely not to fit in. And humans really are motivated by peer pressure and legends. And there's, I think, storytelling also now is really important as it relates to both communications internally and externally. Humans love stories because you can bring a lot of emotion and meaning to something in stories. And we're now starting this amazing campaign here called I Am FedEx. And it's real people in real places telling their story about so many different aspects of their job, their volunteer time in a community, what they think about the company, some innovation. And it's authentic, it's stories, it's something we can put over the internet. It's cool stuff like that that you can do now that you couldn't do before. And by the way, if you think of yourself as a modern media company rather than just as a PR machine, you start to look at the world completely differently. You start to look at managing and creating content differently, the distribution of content and what that content does. And in our case, we look for productivity, knowledge workers, collaborative opportunities, putting campaigns over the internet. So being a modern media company, I think, transcends the traditional role of PR and corporate communications into a whole different space.
But how does social media and the internet, how have they impacted your work on a very sort of pragmatic level?
Well, social media has had a profound impact on our business and how we communicate, and it's still a work in progress. I mean, I think we're all learning. It's sort of like the wild, wild west. I mean, there's tremendous benefits to it, but there's also a lot of vagaries and a lot of pitfalls. Clearly, the most important part of social media is the importance of relationships and understanding and being empathetic towards what people expect of you as a corporation, and for you to know them at a deeper level and communicate and serve them in ways that you wouldn't know and have done before. And that means that you've got to change your whole, your customer service approach, your service levels, the kind of choices and features that you're giving them. And the more customized you make your value proposition or your product to a consumer, the more likely you are to engender that loyalty and trust and develop advocacy. So understanding the emotive part of dealing with consumers in the social media space, as well as the transactional part. I think before social media, companies tended to put more emphasis on the transactional part, the price, the quality of the product, why my soap is better or different than yours. But now, not only do you have to get your transactional parts right, you also have to have equal equally compelling emotional, what I would call emotional intelligence capabilities of the corporation in dealing on a one-to-one level rather than one to masses.
Ethical challenges. Has new media and social media changed the ethical challenges you face or exacerbated them? Or simply taken the same old ethical challenges and just made them much more intense?
Yeah.
Or are they different now?
Well, for FedEx, I don't think social media has changed the ethical standards at all, because we've always, I think, been incredibly ethical and buttoned up with respect to governance. I think what it has done, though, is it has made us much more alert on engaging very quickly to speak up when there is some, story out there or some rumor that's not true, and defending ourselves. I do think, though, it has had an impact on some companies that may have not had the standard of governance and ethics that they should have, because now people can understand and know and research more about that company and apply pressure in that regard. Where I see some of the challenges sort of proliferating for corporate communications people in this regard is that the same standards of ethics and protocol that used to exist and still exist in the traditional media, let's say like editorial quality, it's kind of a mishmash out there. There are some people who masquerade as journalists or bloggers on the internet, but in fact, they do not apply the same level of quality or fairness to their storytelling, and they can quickly create communities based on rumors or misperceptions against you. And we had one specific example, let me share with you, which I think that brings this to life, and that is someone called, it was one of these internet journalists, and they said, we're writing the story, and we'd like your point of view on this story. Of course, we took offense to the story. We did not think the facts were correct, so we gave them some facts in our statement. Well, the story runs, and we're nowhere to be found in the story. There's an uprising in a certain part of the U.S. within this social community. Of course, we're unfairly represented. We're feeling the pressure from this community. So you look at that situation and you say, what happened? So we called the person up, and they had the gall and audacity to say, I really didn't think that your points really fit my story, so I chose not to include the company's statements in the story. Now, we eventually got over the hump and cleared our good name. It was not easy, but those are the kind of things that happen. And I think people rush to get something out because they're paid by word or paragraphs or length of stories. So I think quality has been degraded here in this new wild, wild west. I think people rush to judgments. They're too quick to hit the button without trying to find objectivity and fairness in what they're saying. And I do think that it has had an amazing influence on the political space. I think one of the reasons we have gridlock now in Washington is because our politicians are more worried about the real-time soundbite and their constituencies and what they're hearing on various biased networks that are out there, rather than focusing on the business of America. Whereas in the old days, they would certainly do that. They would debate, they would certainly use the news media, at the time much smaller, of course, but they had a lot more time to focus on consensus building and getting the job done. But now, if you're consumed by the message of the minute or the sort of, show of the hour, whether it's traditional broadcast or online, you're not focusing enough on getting results, getting consensus. So they've become almost obsessed with the media machinery as we know it today and making sure they're not missing a beat. So I could be wrong. That's just my point of view. I didn't mean to get into that sort of political avenue here, but it is a phenomenon of social media.
And you did say earlier, and made a very good case, that the two are related.
Yes.
Political,
Right.
corporate culture.
Yeah.
The recent ethical lapses in business, CEO missteps, failure to pay attention to perhaps safety of employees, safety of the public, et cetera, across the corporate landscape in the U.S. How has that impacted the public relations profession, or the profession, as you put it, in the modern media company?
The corporate malfeasance that we have witnessed in this past decade or so, and these sort of flashpoints of executive largesse, whether it's incredible, packages that people get, parachutes to leave companies, or a lack of integrity around pay for performance, and the meltdowns of some of the companies, has created a level of distrust that certainly has, I think, had a downstream effect on a lot of really good corporations that are doing the right thing. And what it's done is it's made it more difficult for companies to be effective in advocating, whether it be policies to create and stimulate jobs or growth, or to improve our competitiveness. And you're seeing that right now. I mean, the corporate voice in Washington, I think, is inhibited and stymied a bit by the fact that there is a populist sentiment out there that corporations can't be trusted as much as they used to be, that executives are living large, and that there is this unfair divide between them and the frontline worker. And these flashpoints of these sort of egregious examples, if you will, because of the visibility and transparency that people have, because the way the news media operates now, and I think has had a downstream, again, effect on us, and it's diluted the power of the voice in policy making. And history has shown that it's business that is the locomotive for job creation and growth. So right now you have this tax reform debate. Should rates go up, should they go down? Well, business is up there saying, if you bring the rates down to competitive levels vis-a-vis other countries around the world, and you incent businesses to spend their capital on equipment and software and things like that that create jobs and durable goods and stimulate activity, then we will find a better way out of this. Well, guess what? That's a tough sell these days, because the political folks are trying to read the sentiment of their constituents. And if you look at the research, a lot of these constituents are saying, I don't know if we trust corporate America anymore. They're already living large, and don't give them any breaks. This creates a significant problem.
And a big challenge
Yeah.
for corporate communications.
Yeah. Right.
There's a sense that the counseling role of public relations is not as big or so important in the corporate world as it once was. And I wanted to get your feelings about that.
Well, with all due respect, I do not agree that counseling as part of the profession has gone backwards. Well, let me answer that a different way. I respectfully disagree that counseling is not an important attribute of a communications executive these days. In fact, I think it's the opposite. Best I can tell, the executives I speak with, not only at FedEx and many other companies around the world, are expecting their communications people to be more strategic counselors, to be problem solvers, to build consensus, to see around the corner, to ascertain what the vulnerabilities of the corporation are, to build consensus between HR, legal, marketing, and other folks, and IT, to put systems in place so that you can attract and retain the millennial generation, advanced communication systems, for example. All of this gives us an opportunity to add more value as counselors, as opposed to being order takers. And I think the profession has transcended itself from being a message machine or a spin machine, or doing slick annual reports and producing wonderful press releases, to one that really deals with complex problems, interesting opportunities on a global scale, navigating the internet landscape and this kind of very fractious stakeholder environment we live in now, and to have not only a seat at the table, but to be able to lead the discussion at the table. And if you think about why that is, in my opinion, it's because things are moving so fast in the world. Things are now so much more complex. Companies, everyone is trying to be more efficient, more productive. They're trying to innovate. This is bringing about enormous change in sales forces, in IT departments, in pricing, in operations. And so in the effort to become more productive and efficient, there's enormous change going on one hand. With respect to the outside world, consumer expectations have changed dramatically. Competitive dynamics have changed dramatically. Technology can make you, obsolete overnight. So all this complexity, all this speed, all this dynamic, turbulent kind of environment we live in, our clients are coming to us and saying, help us figure this out. My job's on the line, the success of my team is on the line. We need someone with your skill set, with your antenna, with your judgment, with your capability to read nuances and build consensus and help people understand why we need to change, why we need to make these adjustments and get buy-in. And buy-in is one of the most important things you can have in a corporation. If people don't buy what you're trying to do, you will have a disconnect. And that's not a pretty picture. So I'm excited about where we are. I'm really excited about where we're going. I'm so happy that it's really kind of come around, sort of a back to the future. And this is what Arthur Page, I think, articulated very well and embodied so well back in his heyday, is he was a counselor. He understood the power of adding value to the business. He understood that our license to operate was predicated upon whether the public gave us approval or not. He knew that there were complex issues out there that required a 360-degree view of the world and not some linear view of only the customer or the investor or the employee. So it's kind of like now I feel like we're back to the future, and the things that Page articulated are now becoming so important for all of us.
That is really exciting the way you put that. Marketing communications, is that redefining the practice of public relations? Is there a line anymore? Or have they really been integrated?
Marketing communications certainly is a term that in my mind has changed dramatically. I think that there is certainly a fusion between the two disciplines, between marketing and corporate communications. And that's, I think, primarily because everything is now being adjudicated on one playing field. So all the stakeholders, customers, NGOs, politicians, they all can see everything. The channels are available to all of us now. The notion of controlling the message is no longer important. So you've also got to look at the workplace and marketplace more holistically. So the days of taking linear views of the customer through the marketing lens and all the budgets and all the programs and all the channels that they availed themselves to versus CorpCom or PR who would look at the media or maybe employee and occasionally put out a fire and have its own budgets and consultants and channels. All that now has just converged. So the two disciplines need to work collaboratively and in an integrated manner at the planning phase to the execution phase, also in the analytics phase, and then find a way to optimize all of your resources, your channels, your budgets, and take a common view of all stakeholders and looking at both offense and defense requirements of the corporation. So there really shouldn't be an opt-in or opt-out. So if the corporation is facing some adversarial situation, well, that ought to be as much interest to the marketing team as it is to the corporate communications team, because clearly there's a lot at stake there. So I think we're in a world where collaboration, integration, common view of the diagnostic tools and research, the positioning, the language, how we go to market, paying joint attention to cultural activities, understanding that there is a distinct difference between brand and reputation, that the two are complementary, that it's not an either or, and recognizing, as I said earlier, that culture is at the heart of everything we do. So, tremendous change in the world of marketing communications, as you put it earlier.
Mm-hmm. And my question for you is quite simply, of all of your career accomplishments,
Mm-hmm.
which are you most proud?
I am most proud of the team that we have put together here at FedEx in corporate communications and investor relations. The reputation the team has as adding meaningful value to the business, for helping the business through significant change in the past 15, 16 years, and earning the respect and trust of our executives.
When you go to hire someone for your team,
Mm-hmm.
what are the qualities that are highest on your list?
Hiring decisions really are the most important things that an executive can make, because they can make or break a culture. And we look at our team as being a subculture of the FedEx culture. So at the heart of success here is the ability to adapt to that particular culture. Number one is to be a team player, is to be able to collaborate, to be able to listen and be empathetic, to be passionate about what you do, to really understand all of the basic requirements of the job, because reliability is central to the value proposition of FedEx. So each, I think, employee needs to mirror at a minimum what this company stands for, and that's reliability, a very strong customer orientation. And customer does not necessarily have to be an external customer. It's, in our case, a lot of internal customers. I think discretionary effort and going above and beyond and having that kind of trait or attribute, and I know it's hard to spot on the front end, but that is a big deal here. And the other is to care about each other. On this team, I think you will see that people trust each other and they care about each other. And when you build that kind of trust, you can do anything. You can accomplish anything, because people will go through walls. They'll go into a bunker together and know they got each other's back. And the other is to make sure that you're rewarding and celebrating the people, that they know that if they work hard, there's going to be opportunities. So training and development and celebrating and rewarding them is really important too.
A lot of what you mentioned, I think, is you could use the word ethics to think about some of these qualities. And I guess my question for you is, a strong ethical compass, can that be taught, or is that innate, do you think?
I think a strong ethical compass goes back to your upbringing. I don't know if it can be taught. And that's just my personal view. I think it really is part of your value system. I think people can certainly make changes along the way. And those that do, I have seen use a tremendous amount of discipline to do that and to change. But it's really, I believe, goes deep into the roots of your upbringing.
So it makes that hiring decision even that much more important, right?
Yes, I think you have to dig deep in the interview process to really understand what makes a person's moral compass tick.
We've covered a lot of ground.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that you want to talk about or add that we haven't covered in terms of thinking about ethics and integrity in corporate communication?
I don't know. I think
your experience.
Well, I think the one area that I worry about a little bit for our profession is whether we have a strong enough training and education curriculum through the school systems, because of all the profound changes we've talked about in the profession, it's really important that the academic programs in either undergraduate or graduate school systems are commensurate with what companies or agencies or nonprofits are looking for in their communications executives. And many professions like IT and the medical community and the legal community have done a fantastic job of building seed programs along the school system in order to better prepare them when they come into the real world, so to speak. I think we have gaps. Now we have an opportunity to close those gaps by forging a stronger partnership between the corporate practitioners and organizations like Arthur Page and the Page Center and our academic institutions, because we have a lot of very smart people who are professors in a lot of great universities, and they want to do the right thing. They understand, but it's going to take, I think, a lot of work to really build a stronger foundation, because the worst thing we can do is have people come in who are interested and all of a sudden not succeed or have a huge gap between what we expect and what they're capable of doing, and that causes a lot of issues. So that's the one area that I think about our industry that needs some attention going forward.
Is there anything in particular when you think about the way students are being prepared now to go into the profession that perhaps just educators need to pay more attention to?
Well, the traditional communications curriculum in schools is built around writing, understanding the media, how to get your message out, how people consume information. It's important, basic stuff, but the world has moved so far beyond those basic requirements. Those are just tickets into the party, if you will. Now you have to have strong business acumen. You need good project management skills. You need diplomacy and negotiation and persuasive skills and how to build consensus, because nothing's ever very clear and dry and linear. It's almost like in our world we have to deal with multilateral, negotiations, if you will. And understanding technology and understanding even psychology and how and leadership and team building, all these, and culture, all these are really areas that I don't know if we pay enough attention to them in the so-called traditional PR curriculum, but they certainly are very important if you take a day in the life of one of us working for a big company or an agency.
That's a tall order for those of us in the academy.
Yeah, but it's a great opportunity.
Oh, that's right.
You can't succeed by sitting still.
That's right.
The only constant in life is change. If you don't change, you perish. So we have to change. It's not an option.
All right. Anything else that you want to add?
No, just great having you here. Really
Thanks.
appreciate
It's been
it.
a terrific interview. Thank you.
Yeah.